You know the kind of guy who makes nothing but mediocre videos that no one watches? Well, that was me. Every time someone requested something, I ignored it. That's when I realized I had to change. So I made a list of every show viewers recommended to me, and one by one, I'm gonna review them all. My name is Fatman. Hey everybody, Fatman here, and don't you people ever tell me that I am not committed to the bit. This was me before shooting this video, and this is me now. To no one's surprise, today I will be discussing My Name is Earl, a delightful little 96 episode romp that ran from sometime to sometime. That ran from September of 2005 to May of 2009. I won't lie, prior to this project, I hadn't seen a single episode of My Name is Earl, and the reason I sat down to start watching the series was because commenters on my Malcolm in the Middle retrospective kept requesting it. Link to that down in the description. I owe these commenters a huge thank you, because while it's not a perfect series, I had an absolute blast with My Name is Earl, if you couldn't tell by the getup. I quite literally make lists for fun when I'm bored at work, so go figure a series with a list as the catalyst to all the events would grab me. Created by Greg Garcia, the series centers around a petty criminal named Earl who wins $100,000 via lottery ticket and is immediately run over by a car. While in the hospital, Earl discovers the concept of karma, or as he puts it, do good things happen. Do bad things happen. Earl makes a list of everyone he's ever wronged with the intent to atone for all of his mistakes, and by episode's end, karma returns the $100,000 lottery ticket he lost after he was struck by the vehicle. Right out of the gate, this is such a unique and endearing premise for this series that sets the stage expertly. Honestly, think about how many shows begin with the premise that our lead character is a piece of lowly and then the following series is going to be one giant redemption arc. We really don't get that often. Now, we followed anti-heroes or villainous types before, but we're usually watching that character's downfall. We're never really seeing them start at zero and try to better themselves. Right from the jump, Earl's list and his determination to right his many wrongs is such an engaging plot device. And Garcia was really smart to set the table this way. Earl was or is a horrid person, and the series knows this. So when we do see Earl's commitment to fixing his past mistakes, it employs this level of relatability that leaves a lot of room for the character to grow throughout the show. I know I'm harping on it a lot in these opening minutes, but I just can't get over how good this freaking setup is. For me personally, the king of live-action sitcoms is Malcolm in the Middle, and while Malcolm is still the king, I think Earl has cracked my top 5, and I've seen well over 50 sitcoms from start to finish.
Stop it. Get some help.
I can also add with full confidence that the pilot episode of My Name is Earl is the best pilot episode of any series I have ever seen. Yes, I am serious. Forgetting all the things I've said about the characterization of Earl and the series' premise, the show just hits you with this awesome vibe check right from the start. There's an air of familiarity about, even though I've never seen this show or really anything quite like it. And that's just a major credit to how well these writers establish these characters in this universe. On top of that, I am laughing damn near the entire time. The entire bit with Randy and kicking it old school, Earl being unable to keep his eyes open during pictures, these are knockout jokes. I wish I would have recorded me laughing like a drunken hyena at the simple exchange of, "Hey Earl, hey Crabman."
Hey Earl. Hey Crabman. Hey Earl. Hey Crabman. Hey Earl. Hey Crabman. Hey Crabman. Hey Earl.
Oh my god. Well then.
Because for whatever reason, that simple exchange gutted me, and I would literally laugh at it every single time it pops up in this show. The cast of My Name is Earl is a credit to their industry, and NBC originally optioned the pilot on a cast contingent basis, meaning that the studio would only allow Garcia to make the show if he could gather a suitable cast, which I just thought that's how shows worked, but I guess not. Anyway, off we go, and the titular Earl is played by Jason Lee, who, okay, I have to come clean. I absolutely 100% love Lee in this role. However, when I saw that he was the star here, I was a little uncertain with how he could handle it, because prior to watching My Name is Earl, my only experience watching Jason Lee in a starring role was, these. I know, I am so sorry. If watching My Name is Earl was worth anything, it was in my own personal character growth and learning that Lee is actually a phenomenal talent and not just crappy Dave Seville. Though he is also fantastic as Syndrome in The Incredibles. Now, funnily enough, Lee originally passed on the role twice, hesitant to accept his first TV starring role, preferring movies and thinking that shows were kind of all over the place or more difficult than they needed to be to work on. But he met with Garcia and read the script for the pilot and obviously and thankfully accepted. Ethan Suplee plays Earl's younger brother Randy, and this is just such a great cast. Not only do Lee and Suplee bounce off each other extremely well, just absolutely nailing the brother dynamic, but Randy is often the major comedic highlight of these episodes, especially in the first couple of seasons. Due to the list, Earl becomes a bit more grounded, but Randy kind of counterbalances that as he's still up for some debauchery from time to time. Suplee also steals the show early on for his facial expressions alone. Half the time, Randy doesn't even need to be saying or doing anything to get a laugh out of me. He's in the background a lot, wearing this like vacant, lost in thought expression, and when the thought finally floats up to the surface, it winds up being complete nonsense, and I am all here for it. Not only were the Hickey brothers cast extremely well, but the other three members of the main cast are an absolute knockout as well. They're all home runs. Nadine Velasquez as Catalina has this kind of almost ominous vagueness about her, where she winds up exposing bits and pieces of her past that are both equally horrifying and hilarious. I literally never knew what she was going to say next. I couldn't even guess. While that style of humor can typically be hit or miss for me, Velasquez has such a fiery and foreboding delivery that really syncs with the humor of the show, and she often knocks it out of the park. Jamie Presley brings joy to life, and I immediately recognized her as the hot chick I saw for 20 seconds in the background of an episode of Mom.
Are we talking about Dollar Store Margot Robbie?
She is not Dollar Store Margot Robbie. I'll take Jamie Presley.
She looks like she could have played Barbie.
She should have played Barbie. I like Margot Robbie too, but Jamie Presley's cool.
Wouldn't a Dollar Store Barbie be a Bratz doll?
No, that's a hooker Barbie. All jokes aside, Presley wound up being my favorite performance out of the main cast. To bring an endearing nuance to a character like Joy, who is mean, rude, and obnoxious, is a gargantuan feat. And you may as well call Presley a male lady because she delivered. Finally, we have Eddie Steeples as Darnell Turner, aka Harry Monroe, aka the Crab Man. And had they decided not to develop his character at all and just leave him as the Crab Man, I would still love this guy. How could you not? Steeples radiates this bright, chipper energy that makes you just want to go hang out with him. If the Crab Shack existed in real life, I would legitimately go there every single day, if for nothing else, just to toss out a, "Hey, Crab Man." My Name is Earl is not a perfect show, but it is the most invested I've been in a sitcom in years. I love the characters, both minor and major. The premise is one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. The laughs are plentiful. There are even a few tearjerker moments, and the series really just nails almost everything it sets out to be. There are a couple of issues I take with it as we chug further down the line, and there were a couple of moves that actively infuriated me. But I think any series that can elicit such a strong reaction from me signifies that, for better or for worse, this show was doing something right. At the end of the day, it was a hell of a fun ride, and at about 1,400 words into the script, I think I can finally start the review portion of this video. I already spoke on the pilot episode earlier, but the entirety of Season 1 is pretty much a slam dunk for me. The series and characters are established so well from the get-go that it never really has to drag its feet and struggle to find an identity. Everything a viewer needs to know to enjoy this series is found in the very first episode. And from that point on, the series just keeps elevating itself. The show initially follows a loose format. Earl picks something from the list to fix, we flash back to the usually deplorable and hilarious wrong that he had done, and then we cut back to the present where he and Randy set out to make things right. While the concept of karma and reforming oneself after a lifetime of mistakes may be more grandiose and reflective in nature, the execution is simplified, well written, and paced exquisitely. I promise this is the last time I'm going to say it in this video, but God, do I really love this premise. It's almost genius in the way where if you really didn't even care for the humor or the characters, you're gonna come back every week just to find out what crazy thing Earl had on his list that he needs to fix. Thankfully, the show never even has that struggle because, like I said earlier, these are smart, capable writers who write engaging stories and fun and relatable characters. The first season is absolutely loaded with classic episodes. Randy's touchdown is the first to give us a truly wholesome moment between the brothers, which is a heartwarming moment executed in a Hickey Brothers way involving fixed gambling. And the duality of all that really lends itself to the capability of this cast and these writers. Stole beer from a golfer, Teacher Earl, Joy's wedding. There's a plentiful amount to laugh at and engage with. I also want to take a moment to point out the strength of the supporting cast members here. I've already gushed over the main cast, but My Name is Earl captures lightning in the bottle with every minor character as well. Greg Binkley as Kenny James, Earl's small homosexual friend, probably being my favorite of the bunch. Binkley just plays this part so well, and maybe it's just me, but this performance oozes authenticity. I freaking love this. Every single joke, facial expression, odd noise, seriously, everything Kenny does is hilarious to me. Binkley just has this perfect delivery that's not too over the top or campy or flamboyant. He can really stand on his own, and he stands at the top and over so many of the cliches and tropes that kind of surrounded gay characters in this time period. Kenny is played with such an authenticity to his character that I still partially believe that this is how Binkley acts and lives in real life. Like, he's that good in this role. Next we have, check my notes here. I'm gonna try my best. Abdoulaye Ingam as Nescobar Loplop, who is just another gutbuster every single time he's on screen. I can't exactly put my finger on it, but the series captures something special on how they frame certain lines to be delivered. Much like the aforementioned Crabman exchange, Nescobar saying, "My name is Earl," in this super boisterous and exaggerated way shouldn't make me laugh as hard as I do every single time he does it. But it's gonna get me every single time. Every time. Giovanni Ribisi as Ralph Mariano was a character who I originally didn't like that much, but who really grew on me during his run on the show, and it's a shame that we never see him after his prison break in the opening episode of Season 3. I always thought that character would have been perfect for one of our Other Cops Is On or Inside Probe types episodes. Earl and Randy's parents, Carl and Kay Hickey, played by Beau Bridges and Nancy Lenahan respectively, are a great addition to this cast as well. Both play fed-up parents who initially doubt that Earl is attempting to turn his life around after how many years of being a degenerate, with Carl being more of a hard-ass and Kay being a little more lenient. Cost Dad the election, while still being an episode where Carl is portrayed as a hard-ass and wanting nothing to do with Earl, ends with Carl telling Kay that he heard Earl went back to fix a window he broke 15 years ago. Now, that line doesn't really sound like much, but I love that the writers do this throughout the series. They leave these little breadcrumbs that they always come back to later to keep us engaged. Based on what we know about Earl so far and Carl's relationship with him in this episode, it would be downright unbelievable for Carl to fully trust Earl by episode's end. After spending pretty much the entire episode telling Earl to go away and just leave him alone, this small line lends us into the fact that Carl may actually be starting to believe that Earl is trying to turn his life around, and that Earl is telling the truth about the list and wanting to fix things, and these are the little details I adore that they sprinkle throughout. We see that relationship start to heal further in the season in Dad's car, and I really like the decision to keep Carl mainly antagonistic for his first handful of appearances. This really lends itself to the believability of that situation. Earl has been doing super things his entire life. Why should and why would Carl just believe he's magically turned over a new leaf? Not only does this exemplify the type of character Earl was prior to making the list, but this sets us up for a gut punch much later through the series. We have some other loose plot threads strewn throughout, including Joy trying to kill Earl and take his lotto winnings. Thankfully, this show drops that after the first handful of episodes, as this joke could have gotten pretty stale if it ran on. I'm not saying it wasn't funny, but imagine having to deal with that for an entire season's worth. It would get old pretty quick. We receive some small hints and story beats about Catalina being an illegal in the United States, as well as Darnell living a double life, and I don't know how far along these things were planned out back in season 1, but I really enjoy that there was these small plot points to these huge story threads, even all the way this far back. Overall, the first season of My Name is Earl is damn near perfect. The show hooks you and never lets go, offering up a fresh concept, likable characters, and a ton of laughs. Everything is cranked up to 10, and starting right from the premiere episode, the show introduces a loose story thread that spans the entire season, something they would do from this point on, sometimes with mixed results, but it works really, really well in season 2. In Very Bad Things, Joy steals a delivery truck and later ditches the truck only to find out that there was an employee in the back of it the entire time. Facing theft and kidnapping, Joy discovers that this recent little crime spree would be her third strike, meaning life in prison. Right away, I am all in on this concept. While I think that Earl's list staying the main focus is a must, simply because the list and Earl's devotion to it is the real heart of this show, I can understand that just watching Earl do a list item week after week runs the risk of being formulaic. Adding an overarching story that develops throughout the entire season not only gives the other characters some kind of focus, but also allows us to deviate from the list and adds actual stakes. It ups the ante, in my opinion. My Name is Earl quickly establishes that it's not a series that's gonna start every week with a fresh slate and just erase or ditch the consequences of the previous week's escapades, which is pretty appropriate considering the central focus is on the consequences of one's actions. This also allows us to see Joy in a way we've never seen her before. Desperate and frightened. Joy is often presented as this vicious, loud, take no type, which is ironically what got her into this very situation. To watch her become this vulnerable adds a huge layer of relatability, and really allows her to flourish as a character this season. Catalina acquires a new profession as a stripper in Jump for Joy, and as someone who thinks she's really hot, I can't say I hate this, but as somebody who really loves this character, I do have an issue with this choice. This is just fine in season 2, but doesn't bode well for Catalina as a character going forward, which is something I'll come back to a little later on. I do get a huge kick out of Burt Reynolds playing strip club owner Richard Chubby though. That's just a bullseye for me. Next, we have Van Hickey, which is the episode that made me fall in love with Ralph's character. Just a great episode by all means, but Ribisi really steals the show here. After discovering that Earl slept with his mom, Ralph is understandably hurt, and surmises that the only way to make things even between the two is to kill Earl. The hurt in this actor's voice when he asks Earl if that list item is true was so believable that I literally muttered, "Oh damn," as I was watching it. Earl winds up marrying Ralph's mom, but keeps making excuses so as not to sleep with her. And I just have to pick this moment to stop down and applaud the writers and the cast delivery again. Ralph has the quote of the season when he stops down to confront Earl about not committing his husbandly duties with his mother. I know it's ironic given where we started, buddy, but if you don't sleep with my mom, I'm gonna have to kill you.
What a twist.
It's delivered in such an honest and manic way. I fully buy this. The season is chock full of fantastic episodes, but I just want to highlight a few more before we move on. There's a very minor thread of Randy wanting to express his true feelings to Catalina, which he likes, which spirals into Catalina being deported and Randy and Earl having to go to Mexico to get her back. Randy willing to do anything in his power to get Catalina back. Not only do I find Earl introducing the concept of karma to gang and cartel leaders absolutely hilarious, but the fact that it actually works shreds me. I also really love what this two-part episode does for the relationship between Earl and Randy. Randy is always tagging along to do list items with Earl, often sacrificing what he wants to do in order to help his brother. In pursuit of these list items, Catalina gets deported and Randy loses the one thing he really wanted. Something Earl can't quite wrap his head around in the beginning. I really love that moment when realization comes crashing down on Earl, and he's able to see that Randy has conquered every single one of his fears and put everything aside just to get Catalina back home. It really puts into perspective that while Earl is trying to better his own life and fix his mistakes, he's unintentionally been neglecting his brother and his friends by solely focusing on items from the list, and just straight up forgetting to see how the people around him are feeling. This is a great lesson to hammer into the now reformed Earl, who comes to understand that he can't inadvertently neglect people in pursuit of doing items from his list, which thematically would ultimately end up having him going in circles and adding never-ending items to the list. Randy marries Catalina in a green card marriage and brings her back to America, and while I wish a little bit more was done with the Randy-Catalina marriage angle, it does pay off in an incredibly funny sequence when the two decide to have sex for the first time. Our Cops Is On is basically a fictional episode of the real-life show Cops, but set in Camden County and starring the cast of My Name is Earl, and these episodes are always a treat. We don't really get to see Earl being a for extended periods of time anymore, so it is admittedly nice to be able to pan back and watch him be a filthy degenerate from time to time. These episodes also always feature two of my absolute favorite reoccurring cast members. Officer Stuart Daniels, played by Mike O'Malley, who co-stars in the severely underrated sitcom Yes Dear, which funnily enough was also worked on by Earl creator Greg Garcia. And Jeff Hoyne, played by Billy Gardell, an actor who I think is simply incapable of not being funny. To rattle off a couple of more, The Birthday Party is one of my favorite episodes of the entire series, and it is insanely wholesome to see everybody give Earl a gift for his birthday in the form of scratching off a list item for him. His dad, Carl, included, which is just such a nice little bit of character development. 2 balls, 2 strikes see strip club owner Richard Chubby pass away and replaced by his equally psychotic son, Little Chubby, played by the late great Norm Macdonald, and this is just such a great touch as Norm would routinely mimic Reynolds on SNL.
Pick shorts.
Yeah, sure, give me swords.
It's S words. It's S words. And for how much, Mr. Reynolds?
Hell, let's go nuts. Swords for 48,000.
We're not doing swords. This is the sound a doggy makes. Burt Reynolds.
Who is, Scooby-Doo?
No.
Yeah, that was a funny dog, Scooby-Doo. He drove around a van and, solved mysteries.
That is incorrect.
No, that's correct. I remember, you had a pal, Scrappy-Doo.
You know, why don't we just move on to Final Jeopardy? The category is bodies of water. This body of water gave Salt Lake City its name. Burt Reynolds, you put down my name. That's nice. And you wagered is okay, obviously that's some kind of swear word.
We arrive at the end of the season with Joy prepping for her trial and Earl undergoing a nice little mini 3-episode arc where he decides to focus on and patch up other areas of his life, including getting his GED, having a full-time job, and getting his own apartment, all things which he's able to accomplish, with Randy of course tagging along by his side. Now, I mentioned that Joy would become my absolute favorite character as the series went on, and I'll elaborate on some of that here. With the trial story arc commencing, we start to see that Joy isn't just obnoxious trailer trash, but that she legitimately cares about her children and what's gonna happen to their future if she does get put away. Dodge and Earl Jr. aren't a huge presence in the show, but they are around enough to make an impact and really sell this angle of Joy being a concerned mother. She also displays a lot of selflessness for Darnell, the man she truly loves and wants to be with. A genuinely caring and loving mother who's displaying selflessness for other people. I'm sorry, who is this character again? This is not the same woman from season 1. I absolutely adore this though. Getting to explore the vulnerable and human side of a character who was initially presented as an unlikable monster is always going to net you points for me. Hell, if you think about it, that's really the main theme of this series. Unlike Earl though, it wouldn't be believable if Joy completely turned her life around and went straight. She's still mean, she's still loud, she's still violent, but care is starting to rise to the surface here, and there are some cracks being presented in her usually infallible armor. The day of the trial finally arrives, and while it initially appears that Joy might actually make it out of this, the evidence begins to mercilessly stack against her when the court goes over old 911 logs that were made when she was married to Earl. And all of these call logs paint her as a violent psychopath. At the end of her rope and out of lifelines, Joy braces for the worst when at the last minute, Earl jumps in there and lies that he was the one who stole the truck and that Joy is completely innocent. A twist that surprised everyone, including me. My brothers and sisters, I was freaking floored. I was actually yelling at the TV. I'm like, what are you doing? You just got your life together. You got the GED, you got a job, an apartment. The judge sentences Earl to 2 years in prison, and the season ends on this gripping note as the curiosity of, wait, they're really doing this? What the hell happens next? Begins to set in. Joy returns home with her family, and they kneel down to pray, and Joy tells the kids to not forget to thank old daddy. And the duality of the ridiculousness and the sweetness of that line is just a big old thumbs up in the column of why I love this show so much. Season 2, as I said about a million years ago at this point, it is my favorite season and the best season of the show, hands down. Everything that I loved from the first season is bought up and cranked up tenfold. The plots are on a bigger scale with more consequence. The pacing is tighter and the writing is more fluid and consistent. This is also a great season for Joy, Catalina, and Randy, who take huge narrative leaps in character growth. This was pretty much the point where I sat myself down and wondered why the hell I had never watched this show before.
So you actually know Tim Stacks?
Uh-huh.
Wow, he's funny. I'd like to kidnap him, spend some time with him, then maybe set him on fire.
Yeah, he would be funny on fire. Tim Stack, set him on fire.
Set him on fire, watch him burn to death. Tim Stacks, set him on fire. Set him on fire, watch him burn to death. Tim Stacks, set him on fire.
Oh boy, alright, Season 3. Season 3 of My Name is Earl can basically be divided into 3 arcs. The jail arc, which I love. The coma arc, which I enjoy and respect a lot from a creative standpoint. And the closing Billy arc, which baffles me. The 2-episode premiere kicks off right where Season 2 left off, with the episode titled My Name is Inmate number 28301-016. revealing that the show is not cowering out. They are really plopping our main character in jail. The jail arc actually compromises the first dozen episodes of a 22 episode season, over half. For the most part, I love everything here. Again, like when the second season deviated solely from the list to focus on Joy's story arc, this season also gives us the liberty to check in with all the other characters whenever we want, while still revolving mainly around Earl's time in prison. It was admittedly a little frustrating to see the list take a back seat for this long, but given the setting and the scenario, this makes sense. I mean, Earl literally physically has the list taken from him. I understand why the show does this. And in fairness, Earl does make a new list while he's in prison, but I'm not really a fan of when Earl adds something to the end of the list while it's going on in real time. I always prefer when the show focuses on a pre-existing list item from his past. Anyway, as stated, the 2-episode premiere is fantastic, and The Gangs of Camden County is another favorite episode, featuring Earl trying to stop 2 warring gangs with just a fantastic twist. In The Frank Factor, we meet Frank Stump, portrayed by Michael Rappaport, an old criminal acquaintance of Earl and Randy. We learn that Earl, Randy, Frank, and Paco, Frank's friend, portrayed by Raymond Cruz, had all planned this massive robbery back in the day. When Earl and Randy fail to show up, Frank and Paco wind up getting arrested, while Earl and Randy move into Frank's trailer that Joy and Darnell later wind up living in. Paco is also revealed to be Catalina's lost love, something that has been referenced a couple of times throughout the series, and Frank and Paco are revealed to have gotten busted because they crashed into a witness protection van that was housing Darnell. This series of unbelievable coincidences is both hilarious and expertly strung together. I've heard detractors call it plot convenience, but A, these events aren't really retconning anything, and B, it's all just tying back into the modern day story without creating any plot holes. I'm all in on this. Admittedly, creative writing was the first episode of the series so far where I thought it was a little lazy, but it also has one of my all-time favorite Randy jokes with the doctor always said I was borderline artistic, so I can let this one slide. I love that line. I laughed for so long when I first saw that.
What was the line?
It's the creative writing episode, and they're in jail, and Earl's tasked with like writing a story, and like it just pans to each character writing their own story, and he gets to Randy, and Randy's like, "Oh, I'm done," and he's like, "Oh, you wrote your whole story?" He's like, "Yeah, I even drew pictures," and he's looking through them. And Earl's like, "Oh, you always were the better artist." He's like, "Well, the doctor did always say I was borderline artistic." I guess I just wasn't really a fan of the show pausing to give everybody a writing fantasy without really making any forward progress on the plot. I suppose you can call me a hypocrite because I just praised a flashback episode that also didn't really make any forward progress, but that episode at least gave us previously unknown knowledge about the current characters and their situation that we didn't already have. This one doesn't really do anything, and I've never really been a big fan of episodes that just jump around and do the same repetitive thing but giving each character their own twist on it, which is what this one winds up doing. I don't need to see everybody have their own exclusive writing fantasy story thingy. In Frank's Girl, we meet Billy Cunningham, played by the lovely Alyssa Milano, a woman that Earl is heavily hinted to have feelings for. After seeing that Billy is trying to better her life and is being held back by Frank's criminal ways, Earl urges her to break up with Frank and go live her life, advice which Billy readily accepts. As we venture through the rest of the jail arc, we see Earl doing deeds for an incompetent warden in return for that warden shaving time off Earl's jail sentence. We also see Randy take a job as a prison guard in order to be closer to Earl, and this is so wholesome. I love Randy. After Earl is finally released from prison, he loses all faith in karma and reverts to his old ways, only to be immediately hit by a car driven by none other than Billy. Billy gets out to check on Earl and then is immediately hit by a car driven by Officer Daniels. With the jail arc in the rear view, the coma arc begins, and yeah, I'm actually a pretty big fan of this arc as well. Earl is laid up in the hospital in a coma and hallucinating about a perfect life married to Billy. Meanwhile, Randy deduces that the only way to wake Earl up is to keep doing items from the list. With each item Randy is able to cross off, seeming to have a positive impact on Earl's heart monitor. Joy and Darnell accompany Randy, and I really like this little grouping of episodes, which takes us from episode 14 to episode 18. I really admire and respect the decision to have the characters keep doing list items, even with Earl laid up. A lesser series would have put the list completely on the back burner until Earl wakes up. But in a unique twist on a unique presence, they just pass it off to the other characters instead, and we get to watch Randy lead the charge and tackle list items, something he does surprisingly well with. In No Heads in a Duffel Bag, we see a flashback of the time Earl ruined his parents' vacation. This is where Carl's character really comes full circle and goes from hating Earl to loving Earl. And this was the big gut punch that I was talking about that was so expertly set up way back in season 1. In said flashback, we see Carl tell Earl that he gives up on him. The episode cuts back to real time and we see Carl sitting by his son's bedside, leaning over to give him a kiss on the head, and before leaving saying, "Oh, and one more thing, son. I never gave up on you, and I never will." And go ahead and judge as you will, but that scene honestly squeezed a couple of tears out of me. That's some heartwarming right there. There's also a hilarious bit in the beginning of the episode where we've seen that the entire time Earl was in jail, that Randy had still been regularly visiting his parents. And even after Earl was in a coma, Randy is still visiting his parents, but has somehow neglected to tell them that Earl had gone to jail or is now currently in a coma. I love the exchange of, wait, Earl's in a coma? Wait, Earl went to jail? Oh yeah, did I not mention that? In the episode Killer Ball, Earl finally wakes up, and in Love Octagon, he decides to track down Billy, believing that she is his reward from karma for doing such a good job crossing list items off. This kicks off the last little arc to end the season, and if I'm being completely honest here, this was so messy and all over the place for me. It's a shame too, because up until this point, this series' track record has been near spotless, with very minor nitpicks here and there. For this final clump of episodes though, I have no idea what was going through these writers' heads. Earl tracks down Billy and finds out from Kenny that she's being hidden at his house by Officer Daniels, who's led her to believe that she's wanted by the police for running over and killing Earl, while all the while he really just doesn't want to admit to Billy that he ran her over with the car. Officer Daniels develops feelings for Billy, and wanting her all to himself, he is in for quite the shock when Earl and Frank, who has recently escaped his halfway house, show up at Kenny's doorstep. A fight breaks out over Billy when she decides to intervene and ultimately chooses Earl. This honestly is such a super sweet and cathartic moment after watching everything Earl has been put through. Frank takes his leave and Officer Daniels hangs back to bemoan the fact that he is going to die alone when he turns around out of nowhere and falls in love with Kenny, who has been making advances on the officer pretty much throughout the whole series at this point. We've been getting very little glimpses of Kenny making fake 911 calls in order to seduce him. This might be the best relationship in this show. I kid you not. Kenny and Officer Daniels falling in love feels so weirdly wholesome. Like, Binkley and O'Malley just have this perfect chemistry together. From this point going forward, anytime we see the two together, they act like their relationship was always this meant to be, written in the stars type thing. While this entire scenario may have started as kind of a joke on Kenny's multiple attempts to seduce Daniels, watching them play and bounce off each other feels so natural. I am such a big fan of this move. Kenny took the phrase "shoot your shot" to heart, and it worked. We could all stand to be a little bit more like Kenny. Paco also finally finds his lost love, Catalina, and this is just such a sweet moment. I guess that's it. They will never do anything with this ever again. This feels so jarring, considering this plot thread has actually been somewhat of a loose thread for the last couple of seasons now, but Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, Paco and Catalina finally reunite, and this is literally never referenced ever again. As a matter of fact, after this episode, Paco and Frank disappear from the show entirely. Maybe this is for the best, but I actually would have liked to see where this relationship went going forward, especially because this is the point that Catalina starts to stagnate as a character and becomes relegated to more of a background character. I am good with seeing Frank go, though. This is absolutely nothing against Rappaport's acting, but every time I see Frank, I'm reminded of the war at home. And nobody should be reminded of the war at home. The episode ends with Earl and Billy deciding to get married, and I actively hate this choice. I really, really do. Not for anything that happens in this specific episode, but for the way the idea is executed going forward. I should add that I think this specific episode is fantastic, and this really gives off season finale vibes. I really wish the writers would have just put the pin in here, as this pays off everything promised in the beginning of the season and makes good on all of the narrative through lines that have been happening throughout it. The real issue here is that there are only 3 episodes of the season left, and across these episodes, the show makes the baffling decision to establish, then ruin, then get rid of Billy, and I just don't get it. I don't get what they were going for here. Why spend the better part of a season trying to establish Billy as this major player, even having her go on to marry Earl, only to have her turn into a psycho and then literally disappear forever? This just feels so sloppy and rushed, and there is not a single point in this otherwise great series where I feel like they truly dropped the ball. I'd be remiss not to mention that the season was originally supposed to consist of 25 episodes, but due to the writer's strike at the time, it was cut down to 22. So maybe the intention was to have a couple of episodes more where you flesh Billy out as a character, but as it stands, this is the first time where I'm watching My Name is Earl and actively saying to myself, this is dumb. What are they doing? I should also clarify that this isn't a knock against Billy. I think Billy is a fantastic character, and giving her her own list to contrast Earl's was a great move. Alyssa Milano is putting in the work here. Yeah, I know I already showed a picture of her. You know, there's another one up on screen. I've been in love with her for like 2 decades. If you don't like it, go watch someone else. This is my video. I can do whatever I want. I don't care. The issue at large here is we get one single episode where Earl learns that being married to Billy may not be everything he wanted it to be, and that marriage takes sacrifice and it has its up and downs. And then we smash cut to a 2-part episode to end the season where Earl finds out that Billy has already finished her list and done it lazily and sloppily. She goes completely insane, then she threatens to kill Earl, then becomes a good wholesome woman thanks to spending time with the Camdenites, an Amish-like community located in Camden. Billy then divorces Earl, and she is never seen or referenced again. If that sounded rushed, well, yeah, it's because it is. No joke, that is everything My Name is Earl decides to do with the Billy character. Trust me, I'm trying. I'm trying, but I'm failing to understand this choice. On one hand, I really liked Billy. Milano brought this snarky, intimidating swagger to this role that perfectly counterbalances her sweet and quirky side. I love that Billy makes her own list that she winds up pretty much completing in like 2 days. It's such a stark contrast in between Earl's rock-solid belief in karma and Billy's more haphazard who cares approach. She doesn't care that she didn't go out of her way to do things for the people she's wronged. She apologized. What more could be done after all? By that same token, I can also see why they didn't keep her around and commit to Billy being the psycho ex-wife, as we've already had that with Joy. But on the other side of that coin, I really wanted this to work for Earl. It feels almost cruel to give him what he wants and then take it away within 3 episodes considering the grandeur of the situation. He took the fall as an innocent for someone else and spent time in jail, only to come out of that and be immediately hit by a car and put into a coma. They're clearly leaning at the bit at the end of this episode where Billy presents Earl with the divorce papers and he makes the joke about knowing where to sign already, but like, I don't know, I thought that was kind of mean? Maybe this is all semantics and it's secretly genius writing considering how it's got me invested in a fictional character's marriage. But at the end of the day, the biggest problem with Billy is that she just feels like a missed opportunity. One other thing I actively hated was the resolution to Dee Dee, the one-legged waitress's story. Tracy Ashton has been doing a wonderful job with this character since literally the first episode. Dee Dee has been a reoccurring presence throughout, whether through botched in-person meetups or through flashbacks. And she's been that forever, and I actively hate how Earl crosses her off the list during the Billy two-parter at the end of this season. The lesson he learns about mistreating women while crossing Dee Dee off the list is an important one, and one that Earl needed to learn. I don't hate the execution of this. I just hate that it feels like a backdrop to the larger Billy story, considering A, they wind up wasting Billy as a character anyway, and B, Dee Dee has always been the list item. She's the only one that Earl has been unsuccessful with at this point in the series, and the only one that looked like he was legitimately never going to be able to cross off. This is a disservice to Dee Dee's character. Dee Dee deserved her own special episode to resolve this, and I will never change my mind on that. Season 3 of My Name is Earl is a weird one for me. The season is the weakest we've seen so far, but weirdly enough might have my favorite standalone collection of episodes. I'm a huge fan of many of the new characters here, and a fan of what they do with most of the reoccurring characters here. But a good chunk of that is kind of rendered moot, as we never see Billy, Frank, or Paco again. And Catalina just kind of turns into the stripper, and her character just kind of falls off a cliff, something which I feel like could have been avoided if they kept Paco around to give her someone to bounce off of. Unlike the second season, which was able to perfectly counterbalance a narrative throughline as well as the list, Season 3 relegates the list to the background for what feels like about 2/3 of the run. I understand that with the ambitious variety of story arcs going on here, that it's a little difficult to keep the list at the forefront the entire time, especially in scenarios where it's literally physically taken from Earl or he's laid up in a hospital bed. But it kind of felt a little weird that the list was as much of a non-factor as it was. That being said, the shakeup was necessary to keep the show from growing formulaic. And while I may have been a bit harsh earlier, the list is still relevant to like 90% of what's going on. And Season 3 is still hitting the mark the majority of the time. The characters are all still relatable and charming, the jokes are still absolutely hilarious. Overall, none of the issues I've had here are anywhere near enough to tank my enjoyment of this series. And I still went into this final season very, very excited to see what came next. Oh, whew. I know it has been a long video, but we have finally arrived at the endgame.
We're in the end game now.
Season 4, pretty infamously, is the final 27 episode season of My Name is Earl.
27 goddamn episodes.
Yeah, that was a long. That had like anime numbers almost. I, like near everyone who enjoys this series, have also kind of had my viewing experience tainted by the final episode, but I do really want to try to look at this season independent of that specific point. In fairness to my earlier gripes about the list, this was something acknowledged by series creator Greg Garcia, who said that the real goal of this season was to have Earl go back to doing stuff on the list since Season 3 had taken him all over the place on all these different journeys. A promise which this season does deliver on for the most part. So honestly, we're off to an extremely strong start. The Magic Hour, Monkeys Take a Bath, Joy in a Bubble, all just expertly hit the mark of what this series is about. They're funny and charming and clever, and each episode pulls the rug out from under you in an unexpected gut punch. Buddy's untimely death in the Magic Hour, Earl's parents' marriage seemingly falling apart in Monkeys Take a Bath, before that honestly kind of heart-tugging scene at the motel between Clark and Earl. And as great as all these moments are, personally for me, the apex arrives with Joy in a Bubble. After learning that Dodge and Earl Jr. are never invited to their classmates' parties, it's revealed that the reason they are never invited isn't because they're unpopular with their classmates, but because all of the other mothers absolutely hate Joy. Earl informs the rest of the mothers that Joy won't be there this time, and they gleefully invite Dodge and Earl Jr. to come party with their friends. Upon learning this fact due to Earl spilling the beans, Joy, who has been confined to a bubble this whole episode due to a pretty gnarly staph infection, raises hell believing her boys are being set up to be humiliated. When Earl finally spills the beans on the real reason the boys are never invited to a party, Joy becomes enraged, steals Earl's car, and makes a beeline right to the party, completely intent on ruining it for all the other mothers. Earl runs to the park to try and stop her, fearing that he's too late, but when he arrives, he sees Joy sitting in the car, watching from a distance. After watching Dodge and Earl Jr. having an absolute blast with their classmates, Earl and Joy have a brief discussion where Joy opens up to Earl and asks him if he thinks that she's a bad mother. Her delivery of this line is so perfect. Presley legitimately looks like she's on the verge of tears. Earl's response is equally as heartwarming, and the episode closes out. This moment is the moment that caused me to look back and realize that Joy really is the best character on this show. We start the series with her presenting Earl with divorce papers while she cheats on him with Darnell, and then subsequently trying to kill Earl throughout the first season. She remains this loud and obnoxious, mean-spirited person, and yet little cracks in the armor just keep popping up. Hell, I initially assumed that Joy would be the type that didn't give a about her kids, at most viewing them as tax write-offs. I assumed Darnell was just another fling, and the second she found someone better or someone with money, she jumped ship. And man, I am so glad to be wrong. So glad to be wrong on all of this. This happens like 2 or 3 times a season. Joy receives a hard-hitting and human moment that makes it impossible for me not to like her. She actually does love Darnell, and as petty as she can be about some of the relationship stuff, there's a clear care for this person here. When she finally fesses up to Earl about tricking him into marrying her while she was pregnant. When the only thing that snaps her at a drug-induced haze of happiness is somebody throwing a beer can at her child's head. When she shows genuine appreciation for Earl for giving himself up so she doesn't have to go to prison and can stay with her family. People that she was displaying a real selflessness for. These moments just kept building her up in my eyes, and it all just culminates into this, no pun intended, but fully intended, joy of an arc to watch. It would have been so easy for this series to just make her an obnoxious one-note character. But in her own way, while I can't necessarily say that Joy is a good person, she is a phenomenal character, exemplified again in this very season when she gives Randy his win in the episode Pinky. If Joy in a Bubble was the episode that lended me the realization that Joy is the best character in the show, Pinky pounds it into my skull with a sledgehammer. Joy's transformation as a character could, honest to God, be a video essay all on its own, so I'll just leave that here for now. But these last 2 paragraphs have really just been a vehicle to express my absolute admiration for Jamie Presley and give her her flowers. No matter what was asked of Joy, Presley fully brought it to the table and pulled this off flawlessly, and as a viewer, this is the type of performance I hope to see when I watch any form of media.
Very well done.
Moving on from all the Joy love, we have another episode that I really loved, and that is Sweet Johnny! Earl comes across a list item that he actually can't cross off, something I didn't realize I wanted to see until the show gave it to me. Johnny is a reckless stuntman with amnesia and wakes up every morning believing it to be the day before his big stunt. Earl goes on to help him perform the stunt, only for Johnny to completely forget about it the next morning. Earl just point blank arrives at the realization that he's never going to be able to cross Johnny off the list, and this is a choice I love so much. We've seen Earl pretty much have success with every list item he's attempted to cross off. And to come across a barrier like this, like a hard no, a like, nope, sorry, this isn't ever getting done, too bad, is just a real nice touch. I could legitimately go into another paragraph about how much I love this choice and why, but this video is long enough, so I will just leave it to a phrase that sums it up in the ultimate middle finger of ways, and that is, that's life. It's not always going to go your way. There are some scenarios that are just outside of our control, and this is something we all have to deal with. And this is one of those scenarios for Earl. Can we just let the great episodes roll for a second? I don't know why I'm asking, it's my video, it's what we're gonna do. When I first started watching this show, a couple of mutual friends who'd already seen it told me that it starts off really great and then gets really stupid. And this actually parallels a lot of the discourse I've seen about the show online too, and I'm sorry, I just don't get that. This all just feels like you're still mad about the finale, and trust me, I am too. But you can't let that hatred blind you to what was actually a pretty good season. Suplee's absolute over-the-top excitement in We've Got Spirit infected me. I have never cheered, nor have I ever wanted to, but Randy's childlike amazement this entire episode made me consider going to cheer camp. Quit Your Snitchin' may as well have been called catharsis. I have never fist pumped with solidarity with another character this strongly as I did with Earl at the end of this episode. Sold a guy a lemon car. Orphan Earl. Earl and Joy's anniversary. Got the babysitter pregnant. Yeah, I'm not seeing the stupid here. I'm seeing some of the strongest, funniest, and most creative writing this series has had up to this point. We now arrive at Darnell Outed, a two-part episode that sets up the next 5 episodes or so revolving around Darnell's true identity. It's been a long-running gag that Darnell isn't who we think he is, and the series plays with that pretty consistently throughout the run, even revealing at one point that his real name isn't even Darnell Turner, it's Harry Monroe, and that he's been hidden in witness protection. This throwaway joke comes full circle, and we receive a mini story arc that goes balls to the wall and commits with this idea, and I enjoy that out of it. It's a little wild and atypical of the usually grounded scope of the series, but I really love Eddie Steeples as Darnell, and this arc lends itself to some great character moments for Darnell and Joy. The means in which Earl and Randy discover where witness protection has hidden Darnell is also one of the funniest jokes of the series. I also dug for this. I couldn't find it anywhere. I wish I knew this actor's name so I could properly credit him, but I just want to give props to Mr. Turtle, who, now that I think about it, might actually be playing himself. We eventually meet Darnell's father, who interrogates Randy and Earl for info in another fantastic bit to find out where Witsec is hiding Darnell. Through some extremely fun camera work and one of my favorite uses of show don't tell that I've ever seen in a sitcom, Darnell carries out one last mission for his father's agency, clearing his name and allowing him to return to Camden with his family. We chug along for a few more episodes before the ride finally ends, and we arrive at the final episode of My Name is Earl, titled Dodge's Dad. Up until this point of the show, Dodge's father has been a mystery that the show never really hyper-focused on before. We had always assumed that an unknown fan at a Ronnie James Dio concert slept with Joy and that we would never really find out the kid's real identity. Dio! In contrast to that, Earl Jr.'s father was always assumed to be Darnell. After Joy catches herself up in her own lies, it is revealed that the strip club owner, Little Chubby, is Dodge's real father, a fact which she urges Earl and Darnell to just drop and not poke at. Earl, however, is determined to inform Little Chubby of this fact, believing that the rich and powerful businessman could provide a much better life for Dodge. After a hilarious, honestly pretty dark bit with the gun versus bus pass joke, Little Chubby denies he fathered a child with Joy and sets out to make Earl's life hell for bringing it up. Darnell obtains some of Little Chubby's DNA in another laugh-out-loud bit, and Earl steals the family's toothbrushes in order to obtain Joy and the kids' DNA. Joy, furious that Earl intervened, opens the DNA results and drops a bomb on the audience. Turns out, due to misconception based on Halloween costumes, Earl is revealed to be Dodge's real dad. Well, Darnell's DNA is shown not to match with anybody in the family, disqualifying him as Earl Jr.'s father, and holy what a plot twist. The episode closes on such an engaging cliffhanger, one of the best this series has ever had. Man, I cannot wait to see how this resolves. I cannot wait to start season 5 and see how this all plays out. I'm just excited as looking forward to it. Can't wait.
I'm gonna tell him.
Don't you dare.
Yeah, unfortunately, my friends, This is the end of the ride, as My Name is Earl was abruptly cancelled and we never get a resolution to the story. The intention was to wrap this plot point up in the premiere episode of Season 5, but due to corporate greed and god-awful communication by pig-headed Hollywood executives, this is how the story ends. I could try to sum it up for you, but during an appearance last year on the Slick and Thick podcast, Ethan Suplee did a better job than I ever could, so I'll just roll the clip.
What the happened with My Name is Earl?
My Name is Earl was picked up for another season, and then the way TV works is there's a studio that owns the property and pays for creating the property, and then it's licensed to a network. So our studio was Fox, and the network was NBC. And the network is responsible for picking it up. They call and they say, we want to license the show for another year. And we were a hit. And the network called the studio and said, we want to license the show for another year. And the studio said, well, we want more money. We want to renegotiate our deal with you. And the network basically did not respond for 2 weeks. And then the studio called back and said, we'll take your deal. And the network said, too late. Really? The show is canceled.
I finished watching the series about 2 weeks ago as of the writing of this script, and I am still angry. By the time this video is shot, edited, and uploaded, it'll probably have been a month, and I promise you I will still be angry. I keep feeling like I'm slacking and there's more to watch. Like I've just been procrastinating on finishing the series, and every time I look back, I realize that this cliffhanger really is the end and I get pissed off all over again. This is more than unfair and so needlessly cruel. It's not like My Name is Earl just fizzled out and ended on a series finale that wasn't really a finale. I've seen that dozens of times in other shows. My Name is Earl didn't conclude on a normal episode that wasn't a finale that wound up just being a finale because the show was canceled. The series ends on an interesting and crucial story thread. The show had more to say and NBC was too stupid to let them say it, and that's why we got what we got. Garcia participated in a Reddit Ask Me Anything in 2013, and a fan asked him the inevitable question: who was Earl Jr.'s real father, and does Earl ever finish the list? We never really got the chance to fully figure it out, but the talk in the writer's room was that Earl Jr.'s dad was going to be someone famous. Someone like Dave Chappelle or Little John. Someone that came to town on tour and Joy slept with. But when we got canceled, we never got the chance to figure it out. I was worried about doing a cliffhanger, but I asked NBC if it was safe to do one at the end of the season, and they told me it was. I guess it wasn't. I had always had an ending to Earl, and I'm sorry I didn't get the chance to see it happen. You've got a show about a guy with a list, so not seeing him finish it is a bummer. But the truth is, he wasn't ever going to finish the list. The basic idea of the ending was that while he was stuck on a really hard list item, he was going to start to get frustrated that he was never going to finish it. Then he runs into someone who had a list of their own, and Earl was on it. They needed to make up for something bad they had done to Earl. He asks them where they got the idea of making lists, and they tell him that someone came to them with a list, and that person got that idea from someone else. Earl eventually realizes that his list started a chain reaction of people with lists, and that he's finally put more good into the world than bad. So at that point, he was going to tear up his list and go live his life. Walk into the sunset a free man, with good karma and finally at peace with what he's accomplished. I would love to see this eventually conclude. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not, but if there was a time for it, now is the time to take that shot, considering everything under the sun is finding its way into reboot or remake territory. There doesn't need to be more seasons or anything. We don't need to throw together a bunch more episodes. But maybe a proper movie like other members of the cast have been talking about. Something with proper time, a returning cast, and a nice budget so we can finish this beautiful, beautiful story that this series has set up. Despite the idiocy of Hollywood studios leaving this series on a cliffhanger for perpetual eternity, I really loved my time with My Name is Earl. The show originally aired when I was growing up and I somehow missed it. Probably because I was distracted with stuff like Malcolm in the Middle, The King of Queens, and That 70s Show. But after watching it, there is no doubt in my mind that I would have loved this series back then had I paid attention to it. I would have absolutely loved and treasured this show. And I do now, and I'm thankful that I at least got that opportunity now. Better late than never, right? every single thing you want in a show like this is present and accounted for. The charming, relatable, and lovable characters. Stories that have weight to them and carry over beyond the confines of that week's shenanigans. The cast and staff clearly care about the product they are working on. This never, ever feels like just a paycheck to anybody, despite some of my earlier gripes. The actual times this series misses the mark are few and far between, and I am already word of mouthing this show to everyone I know. That's how much of an impact this had on me. I laughed, I cried, and I shaved my beard for My Name is Earl. After 15 years, fans are still talking about this show. And while the series unintentionally ended on a sour note, whether we get a resolution or not, I know that we're going to be talking about My Name is Earl in another 15 years. And I legitimately feel grateful to be able to join in on the conversation. And considering it feels like 15 years since I started doing this video alone, with that, I think it's time to leave Camden for a vacation to somewhere else. Everybody, I have been Fatman, and thank you. I know this was a long video, and I know that Earl's ending is frustrating, but I love this. I absolutely adore this show. I will always adore this show. And I, like many of you out there, are hoping that one day they could find their way back around to this, as everybody still seems to want to do this. If you haven't had your fill of Earl, Greg Garcia does have a spiritual successor show in Raising Hope, which I've heard is pretty good. I might check that one out. And I hear the Earl cast is splattered in there and a bunch of cameos. But if you like this video, please subscribe, hit that stupid little bell to stay alert, share this around. I worked a long time on this. I would love for people to check this out and engage with me, man. I only have 2 people in real life that I can talk to about this show, so I'm trying to talk to everybody I can. Tell me your thoughts, tell me what you agreed with, tell me what you disagreed with. I don't care. And for 2 final notes, 1, you NBC, you now, you tomorrow, you forever. I am just trying to be a better content creator. My name is Fatman. Earl makes a list of everybody he's ever wronged. Excuse me.
How dare you.
Right out of the gate, this is such a unique and other word premise. Right out of the gate, this is such a unique and endearing premise. One more time. Now, we followed anti-heroes or vanilla? What was that stumble? For me personally, the king of live-action sitcoms is Malcolm in the Middle. Sitcoms. That was such a weird emphasis on that word. Forgetting all the things I've said about the characterization. Mush that together. Velasquez has such a fiery and foreboding delivery. Well, all jokes aside, Presley wound up being my favorite performer. Wow. At the end of the day, it was a hell of a fun ride, and at about 1400s, thankfully the show never even has that struggle, because I said, Teacher Earl stole beer from a gardener?
A gargoyle.
A gardener. Teacher Earl stole beer. Why? We see the relationship heal a little further in episode name was, it's called Dad's Car. I couldn't. One more time. I'm not saying it wasn't funny, but imagine have to. In Very Bad Things, Joy steals a delivery truck only to ditch that same truck later and find out that there was someone living in the back of it the entire time. Not living. He wasn't living there. He was kidnapped. Duh. Dodging a genuinely caring and loving mother who's displaying selflessness for while still revolving mainly around Earl's time in prison. Excuse me. But I can give it a pass as it has one of my all-time favorite Randy jokes.
I'm sorry.
You ruined it!
He took the fall as an innocent... Maybe the... I understand that with the ambitious variety of story... Oh, God. The Magic Hour, monkeys take the... When Earl finally spills the beans on the real reason... When Earl finally spills the beans on the real reason that the boys are never... Pinky pounds it into my skull... And this actually Soup Lee's absolutely over the type